Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Welcome back to the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph, joined as always by my co-hosts Connor Hope and Riley Davis. Back after a bit of a break. We're working on some stuff behind the scenes at Heat Check CBB that we're very, very excited about, which took some time off our hands. And I'm also just going to be frank, like we were tired from the season. We were all doing a lot, and we all have full-time jobs. So we took a little bit of a break, and that was nice, but we're certainly back to you on the grind. We're recording this on Friday, June 9th. We're going to start bringing these to you regularly again. We're getting back on a set schedule now that we've had kind of a chance to reset. And it's time to start prepping for the new season. And we thought we had a break with the transfer portal. The deadline for undergrads to enter has come and gone, but grad transfers are free to enter anytime. And on this Friday, we've had two major ones enter. Paul Mulcahy from Rutgers has announced he is entering the transfer portal, and Jordan Brown from Louisiana has done the same. Two major late additions. Connor, there are several teams, several high-profile teams with multiple scholarships available. A lot of times we have felt that these teams might be left holding the bag with these empty scholarships, but there are some major prizes to be had, particularly in Mulcahy and Brown this late in the cycle.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing, and it's not just Mulcahy and Brown, but you're going to see a lot of grad transfers now who see these openings start to hop to those schools. And I think that's why you always, the draft decisions wasn't the end of it. Right, Gonzaga fans, speaking as a Gonzaga grad, were worried about what Anton Watson was going to do. Even though he had decided he was going to come back to school, the final decision to actually return to Spokane to play out his final season at Gonzaga was not a guarantee. Right, there was some talk earlier on in the offseason that he might be heading south to play for Tommy Lloyd at Arizona. So I think you're going to see a lot of these teams that have these grad transfers either leave or commit now that the initial influx or the initial run on undergrad transfers is complete. You mentioned there are teams that have not added players through the transfer portal yet, have some scholarships open. Kentucky being the major one. I know there's some rumors or there's some smoke around Arthur Kaluma. But I think there's, 3 Power 5 schools that haven't added any transfers. Kentucky's one of them. Michigan State doesn't really need to at this point, and Oregon State's not going to. So, I mean, they might, but
it would be a last resort for somebody.
Right. But yeah, we're just going to see a lot of these types of players. I think Mulcahy, for me, is probably a little bit more of a surprise because I felt like Rutgers, they weren't in a terrible spot. They weren't in a great spot. But, I'd be interested to see where he transfers. I think there are a couple of landing spots, even in his own conference, that he could take a long look at. And then Jordan Brown, last year was really a get-right year at Louisiana. He hadn't lived up to the hype at either of his previous 2 spots. I think there's going to be a lot of teams looking at him, not just in the SEC. Obviously, he's transferring from Louisiana, but also, outside of that, if Kentucky does whiff on Kaluma, they could take a long look at Jordan Brown. So we'll see where these players go, but they're not the last 2. We're going to see a lot of grad transfers between now and probably mid to late August not even the transfer portal, but just announce their intentions to grad transfer and go to these schools. I think UCLA has a couple of openings. They're right now looking like the 3rd or 4th best team, optimistically, in the Pac-12. So we'll see.
Yeah, options there. Riley, with these 2 new entries, how do you evaluate potential landing spots or just the landscape overall?
Yeah, regarding Mulcahy, I got to push back at Connor just a little bit with him saying it's a surprise, just because as we learned through the Cam Spencer saga, Rutgers is broke. They're struggling with their NIL a little bit, it seems. And I would guess that with Cliff Amarier coming back, he's probably commanding like the bulk of whatever their collective is drumming up, to where maybe, like, again, this is not sourced by any means. This is my speculation based on what we heard about Cam Spencer. Yeah, I would guess Amarier is getting a bunch, to where maybe there just wasn't enough to meet what Mulcahy's looking at. And I think Mulcahy's deserving of a big payday. I mean, he can guard the 3 and the 4, and he can run the point. Like, this late in the game to get a veteran guard who is a true two-way player and has been on good teams that's a real advantage for wherever he ends up. I know Adam Zagoria tweeted out Kentucky, Kansas State, Michigan, and West Virginia. Seems like West Virginia is tied to every big name transfer, and we'll get to them when we talk about our top 25s later. Spoiler, I'm big in on the ears this year. But another team that I would love to see him end up at Kansas State. I feel like between him and Tyler Perry, that could be just an absolutely dynamic backcourt. And with how well K-State defended this past year, I'd attribute a lot of that probably to Keontae Johnson on the wing, and Mulcahy would be able to slide right into that role. At least he's way different player than Keontae, obviously, from an athleticism perspective and even what they do on the court. But he would give Jerome Tang another, like, kind of a lockdown defender. Maybe lockdown's a little too strong, but at the very least, a very strong defender on the wing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Connor, you mentioned schools as their own conference. Illinois has been trying to get a point guard and hasn't been able to get one, and that's a real big hole left on their team. I know they're going to be in play for him. It'll be interesting because there are certainly going to be some late summer additions to teams that are going to be impactful. Raul, you mentioned kind of restacking our top 25s, and that's what we're going to do here. So take a look at some teams that are at the top of the rankings and all the way down to top 25. We have each updated our own personal rankings. A updated consensus heat check top 25 is going to be out in the next couple of days on the website, so make sure you're on the lookout for that. Check it out, heatcheckcbb.com. While there are these new transfers and new shakeups, the top of everybody's rankings, both at HeatCheck and in general around the country, there isn't as much diversity. I think there's a clear top 2, top 3 teams that everybody is evaluating for there. Duke has been in that conversation since then. It was announced that pretty much everybody was coming back. Filipowski, Tyrese Proctor. I know they lost a couple of guys, Derek Whitehead, namely among them, and Derek Lively. But they're bringing back a lot of people along with the top recruiting class. And then Kansas has jumped in that conversation as well with the return of Kevin McCullough, obviously landing Hunter Dickinson in the transfer portal. That'll help. Those are the general top 2. So, Riley, I want to ask you, how do you stack those 2 teams up, Kansas and Duke? And is there another team that could potentially jump in the mix and be on the same plane as those 2, or do you view it as those 2 and then everybody else?
As of now, I would say it is those 2 and everybody else. And I think you could maybe argue that by the season's end, Purdue and Michigan State would be the 2 favorites to jump into that tier. But in my opinion, I think Duke and Kansas, they're pretty neck and neck. I have Kansas slightly ahead, but that's mainly due to having Bill Self as the coach, because I like Duke's roster better. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Kyle Filipowski contend for Player of the Year. I wouldn't be surprised to see Tyrese Proctor contend for Player of the Year. And anytime, and I'm talking nationally, not just ACC. And anytime you have 2 guys who get mentioned in that breath, you're going to have a solid team. Like Mark Mitchell, obviously back as well, kind of rounding out those sophomore returners with someone who I think he regressed down the season as a 3-point shooter, because he started out just like torrid from deep, which was really against his kind of went a counter to his scouting report. And so I'm not really expecting him to be like a plus 35% shooter for a whole season this year, but he just does everything else so well from a defensive standpoint, from a rebounding standpoint, and just buys into his role. And, he's not really getting talked about at all with with Tyrese Proctor and Kyle Filipowski being back. So just, even if they didn't have this loaded freshman class, those 3 alone, I think, would be enough to put Duke in the top 10. But when you combine that with someone like Jared McCain, who I even think is a little bit underrated as probably the best player in California coming in, it makes sense to have them right there neck and neck with Kansas. And with Kansas, I think like I probably wouldn't have them as high if it wasn't for McCullough coming back. And I get the shooting issues, but I think they can be near elite defensively. And even looking at last season, Grady Dick was their only good shooter. Like Jalen Wilson, DeJuan Harris, they could make enough to keep them honest. And you got to hope. I mean, Hunter will make some to keep him honest. DeJuan will probably do his thing again. I just believe that Bill Self will figure it out, and he'll get them out in transition with DeJuan Harris at the point, and that kind of can compensate some from, not really having much shooting in the half court.
Yeah, I'm with you with it being Duke and Kansas. I think there's a small gap between them and the next tier of teams, but I do think it's those two. I have Duke ahead of Kansas because the roster is better. I have full belief that Bill Self's going to get the most out of this Kansas team, but shooting is a concern. I want to see how it looks on the court and what Self does before I want to put them up, because preseason is a lot of on paper. And on paper, I really like what this Duke team has. Self's going to win pretty much any coaching matchup in the country, but it's not like John Shire is a bad coach. He showed his first year that there's still some growth to do, but he showed he gets it, and that he is a really good X and O guy as well, or at least good enough X and O guy to go with the recruiting chops. Part of that, too, is I think Tyrese Proctor is in for a major breakout campaign. He showed all of those signs late in the year, his progression. I would not be surprised if he's in the National Player of the Year conversation, if not a front runner this season. So some of that is projecting, but to me that splits hairs. But again, I would not be shocked if 2 weeks into the season I have Kansas over Duke, and not that Duke did anything bad. It just, again, what you mentioned with Bill Self, I just need to see a little bit first. Connor, you have another team in at number 2 in your rankings. Why are you so high on Purdue?
They have the best player in the country, I think.
Fair.
At least, and argue skill. I think he is the best complete player, meaning take his body into the equation. He's the best player in the country. And I trust, if there's one thing I've learned from Matt Painter, it's that those Purdue guards, I mean, they might not be fantastic. They might be where we thought they were going to be. They just got off to a hot start last year. They might be ahead of where we thought they were going to be. But they do make really good, take really good steps as sophomores. They tend to. All the guards going back, the past couple of cycles for him, have made significant or at least incremental steps as sophomores. And so I think when you have that backcourt, which I'm expecting to take a step forward, you have Zach Edey, who's the best player in the country. I think that's a team that has a really good floor, and you know what you're going to get out of it. Now, they weren't as aggressive in the portal as I think they probably should have been, considering what they lost. But some of the things that they lost, I don't necessarily think are massive, considering what the play we saw out of some of those players late in the season, right? David Jenkins,
your favorite player,
one of those guys who my absolute favorite player, but he would have really fantastic games, and then he would disappear in games where they really needed him. And so, am I going to say that that's a huge loss? No, because I don't actually think that David Jenkins is that massive a loss. Some of their other losses into the transfer portal, are big. Namely, I believe Newman entered the transfer portal. So, I really liked him. I thought he was a good bench piece for them. But as long as the Purdue players around Zach Edey can gain that confidence that they were sorely missing in that game in the NCAA tournament, where none of them could either make a shot or take a shot. I know we all saw Gillis play almost a a modern day Draymond Green role where he gets a wide open look from three and just doesn't shoot it. Those things need to be fixed. But anytime you have the top post player in the country, a lot of the other issues can kind of be masked. We saw that with Gonzaga 2 years ago when they had Chet Holmgren and their defense was good, despite the fact that Chet Holmgren was probably the only good defender on that team, maybe Andrew Nemhard as well. So I don't know. I just like this Purdue team.
Yeah, I mean,
have you, either of
they
y'all
were
seen
number one for majority
Miles
of last
Colvin
season.
play?
What was that, Riley?
Sorry, I said, have either of y'all watched much of Miles Colvin, the freshman wing they have coming in? Because I don't know what his competition level was like in high school. He played at a private school in Indiana, private Christian school. But just looking at his highlights, I can't remember the last time Purdue had an athlete like that on the wing.
They need it. They'll need him to play a role that I was going to say a lot of freshmen don't typically play for Purdue, but considering both their starting backcourt last year was freshmen, who knows? Who knows? I think we'll be able to tell within the first month of this season if Purdue is going to be really good again. I think the loss to Fairleigh Dickinson overshadowed and really masked the fact that Purdue returns pretty much everybody from a team that was a number one seed and was number one in the country for majority of the season. You have a team like that returns National Player of the Year, they should be good. Teams are going to press them a lot right away, and that was their major flaw down the stretch last season. If the guards have grown, particularly in that area, ball handling pressure, making decisions under pressure, then Purdue is going to be fine. I think we could see them in the mix for a one seed again. We'll be near the top of the rankings. Probably Big Ten favorites over Michigan State, although Michigan State should have a very, very good team. But if they don't handle pressure well early on in the season, that's going to be an issue. And that's going to be a storyline, I think, to watch early on. Mention Michigan State. I think they're in that next tier with the reigning national champions, UConn. And UConn lost a lot as well. Expected to lose Jordan Hawkins. Expected to lose Adama Sanogo. Probably hoping to have Andre Jackson back. He ended up staying in the NBA draft. Connor, as you look at the rest of that top five, how do you stack up where UConn fits, Michigan State fits, and do you have any real concerns about either of them moving forward? What's keeping them from being in that top tier for you?
For Michigan State, it's as simple as your only additions to this roster for Michigan State are your freshman recruiting class, right? And that's not a bad thing. But this, remember, is a Michigan State team that was a 7 seed in the tournament. You're adding freshmen. They didn't add anyone with experience. Now, they returned basically everyone, but I think with Michigan State, kind of what the floor is at this point, right? I don't think they're going to be worse than a 7 seed. I think their floor is probably a 4 to 5 seed, which is great. Their ceiling, national champion. But we haven't seen a Michigan State team in a while hit the ceiling. And we've had high expectations for Michigan State in the past. But, specifically that Cassius Winston, his final year, I believe they opened, Michigan State opened up in the top 3. So that's where I'm hesitant. I have them in my top 5. I have the same top 5 as I think everyone else. I think everyone else in this group. Riley has Houston, but everyone else has this. Brian and I have the same top 5. Michigan's that 5th team for me. I trust Bill Self as a coach more. UConn's coming off a national championship, returning some key players that they needed to return. I know Andre Jackson's gone, but they returned some players, bringing some really good players as well. Michigan State for me is just, I need to see the freshmen do it. And it might seem hypocritical because I do have Duke at number 1. We haven't seen their freshmen do it. But Duke, at least for me, have some of those players that I think may be a step above these Michigan State players.
Well, speaking of breakout National Player of the Year contenders, Donovan Clingan for UConn is right there. I know they lost Thomas Sanogo, Final Four MOP. Not expected to really lose much production from the front court, and he's a big reason why. Riley, let's touch on Houston because you do have Houston in your top 5. You are wearing a Houston shirt right now. I think I understand the love for Houston, but why are you so high on the Cougars?
I mean, part of it is because, again, to lean on coaching, kind of like I did with having Kansas at number 1. I would say if Bill Self is the best coach in the country, I mean, Kelvin Sampson, it's tough to say he's not that far behind considering Bill Self has 2 rings, but like for all intents and purposes, he's not that far behind, especially compared to the rest of the landscape. It's like I've just gotten used to year in, year out. Houston finishes top 5 on KenPom, and I love the additions that they brought in through the portal with LJ Cryer, who was an absolute bucket and just a flamethrower at Baylor. And I trust the infrastructure that Houston has to, at the very least, mask some of his defensive deficiencies, and at best, maybe help him improve on that end of the floor as well. Damian Dunn is a kid who I saw a little bit of at Temple, and I'm cheering for just because he's a North Carolina guy. But he had like a crazy free throw rate at Temple, good enough shooter, can handle a little bit. And I think with him, Cryer, and Jamal Shed, you got 3 dudes who can create their own offense. You got Terrence Arsenault, who could have a nice little sophomore breakout. I think the front court's kind of lacking. You don't have a Jarris Walker type. It's Jawan Roberts and Javier Francis right now, who are sort of the only known commodities. But again, we've seen Houston do well with worse big men than that. Like, I'm convinced that Kelvin Sampson could find any dude who's like 6'6" or taller and make him into a serviceable big just by getting him to like crash the glass and be a dog, like that's just kind of what his bigs do. So yeah, that's my case for Houston.
I think that's fair. I certainly think that's fair. I mean, we both have Houston top 15. So it's not like we're down on Houston. At least I'll speak for myself. Felt like last year was kind of the time for them to break through and hit another level, and they didn't. And I think they're a little bit worse. I still think they'll be very good. First year in the Big 12 though, it's gonna be interesting. Like the Big 12 this year, I this is something we're gonna touch on more as we get closer to the season. But like that league is gonna be bleeping awesome. Because you still have Texas and Oklahoma, but you add in a top 15 Houston team, Cincinnati team on the rise under Wes Miller. You add in BYU, who has at least a recent history of being good. I know they're still kind of rebuilding, and UCF, but they have a lot. They just produced a projected lottery pick in Taylor Hendricks. So, who can say? But adding Houston to that mix and watching Houston play that schedule, I think it's going to be very, very interesting and eye-opening. For just how legitimately good Houston is or could be. I want to talk about FAU right now because they're a team that I've seen people have in the top 5 and I've seen people keep outside of the top 15. And I think both trains of thoughts have valid points to them. I have them top 10 at 8. Riley, you have FAU checking in at number 14. Connor, you have them just in your top 10 at number 10. They return everybody they can from last year's Final Four team. They held off the Kentuckys of the world. There were some rumors of potential poaching for multiple teams, for multiple players on that roster. They managed to keep it together. So, Connor, as you're evaluating this FAU team, I know we've had a little bit of this discussion in the past, but with a clearer picture now of the country around them, how do you evaluate this team and their expectations going into a new season?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, right, they were a 9 seed last year, and people can look at that and say, look, they're in the same boat as UNC from last year, right? They were a 9 seed, went on an incredible run, made it to a Final Four, and they aren't going to replicate that. I get it. They were legitimately a top 15 team last year. Mm-hmm. Like, they were one of the 15 best teams in the country last year. I know they're 17 on Ken Palm. I think a lot of that could be due to adjustments. But if you look at the raw efficiency, at least, I mean, they were at top 5 to 10, I think, on both sides of the floor. Fantastic players, share the ball. Everyone on that team pretty much can score. Great coach. So I get the desire to put them in the top 5. You know, do I think that there are 5 better teams? I think the top 5 that, or the top, or at least 4 of the top 5, depending on where you want to put Purdue and where UConn and stuff like that, are better. They're more talented. They have coaches that have proven that they can win as well. But as far as FAU goes, I think looking at them as a top 5 team might be a little bit of a stretch, because that, again, is expecting them to make a significant jump, considering what other teams have done. Dropping them outside of the top 15, I think, is looking at them as a UNC rather than a UCLA from the year before. Mm-hmm. And I think UNC went on an incredible run, but we saw flaws in that team in that year. The previous year, UCLA started off slow, but I don't think we saw the same flaws leading up to the tournament. And then in the tournament, obviously, they went on that run. And then the following year, people, and I've said this multiple times before, people undervalue what UCLA was the year after they made it to the Final Four. That was still a top 10 team. Yeah, and so a really good team. I agree with you, Brian. I think I can see both sides, outside the top 15, inside the top 5. I kind of split the difference, put them at 10, right ahead of Texas, but also Houston and Gonzaga and San Diego State. So like that is kind of where I have these were the really good non-Power 5 teams from last year, plus Texas, in that kind of 10 to 14 range.
Raleigh, what are your thoughts on them? You have them at number 14. How do you see them stacking up going into the new year?
Yeah, I think I've been a little bit cautious because I don't want to go full alignment with Bart Torvik, who has them at 20th right now. I wanted to put them higher than that, but I also didn't want to overreact and put them in the top 5 or the top 10 like I've seen some of our like different media colleagues do. I don't know. I'm just like trying to shape my own opinion of them, but at the same time, I'm like, it's just going to be tough to peg, because I think on paper they should be a top 10 team. They won 35 games last year, and they have guys like Elijah Martin and John L. Davis who would start for any program in the country. And they have size in Vlad Golden and Giancarlo, I want to say Esposito, but I know that's Gus Fring and Breaking Bad. Giancarlo Rosario, they're back up big to where they have legitimate size too, that I think kind of sets them apart from other, non-Power 5, non-Power 6 schools. I think what does sort of hold me back a little bit to lean fully into top 10 is like Connor said, they are very different from the UNC team that made it to the national championship, that peaked at the right time and put together a really good month and a half. Like FAU was good for pretty much the whole season. I do kind of wonder like how hungry they're going to be coming into the year, because it is like, I'm still going to say, as a Carolina fan watching them last year, I've just been on the side of watching a redemption team or an unfinished business team, and it's hard to recapture that magic. So I do trust FAU's coaching a ton with Dusty May. I think that dude is worth his snuff. And it doesn't seem like they're going to be, all that concerned with getting NIL bags or whatever it might be that could be detracting them. Like maybe they will come in just as hungry and just as much looking for like that quest to get back to the Final Four or something. But that's been my only hesitancy, is that it's kind of hard to recapture that magic with a run it back team.
Yeah, I have them 8th. I have them fairly high, and I think a lot of that is just due to question marks elsewhere around the country, because they do bring everybody back from that team, and that team was legitimately good. Won 35 games, was a analytically a top 25, top 30 team for most of the season, which is really, really high for Conference USA team. And we saw how good Conference USA was in the postseason last year. I say all that and think they're very good, but also I'm a little bit cautious, not because of the run they made and being able to repeat that. There is obviously some magic that you have to capture to go on a Final Four run. But their Final Four run wasn't overly difficult. Like I think teams could go through the same run that they went through last year through the region and be a top 15, top 20 team and still make the Final Four. Right? You had that Memphis game, and I picked the wrong team in that game. I had Memphis in the Final Four. But I thought whoever won that game had a real chance to make a run. And that game they won in the last 5 seconds. Win that game, you play Fairleigh Dickinson, a 16 seed in the second round. Back and forth. That was a really entertaining game. But you win that game, you move on to play a Tennessee team that we all had questions about and we knew was flawed. And you have to give them credit for beating those teams, but you play a very flawed Tennessee team. And then you play a Kansas State team that essentially at that point in the season was a one-man show and had just played a really tough overtime game against Michigan State that kind of gave you the blueprint for how to defend by showing you how not to defend. Marquise Noel. There is no easy path to the Final Four. There's no easy path to the Final Four. But that is not one that immediately cements you to me as like a super, super elite team. Right? Certainly cements you as a very good team. Certainly. But it doesn't, to me, have you go into the next season without questions. Right? I do think you give them a lot of credit for returning everybody. The same way we're giving Michigan State a lot of credit for returning everybody. And this is a legitimately good team who there is something to be said for a team with players with as many options as these guys had, making a commitment to return and having everybody back. But having expectations too is another beast. We'll see. But I think given the landscape elsewhere, I think the worthy of a top 10 ranking, it's almost a until proven otherwise deal for me. The team
and their path this year is tougher. There's no doubt about it. Like they're going to lose more games.
Moving up to the American.
Moving up to the American, right? They will continue to have to play UAB, North Texas, but then they also get Memphis, Tulane, Temple, Wichita State. So they're going to lose more games this year. And people might look at that and say, well, they're not that team from last year, and that team from last year wasn't top 5, top 10. But even if they quadruple their losses, that's still 4 losses, and a 4-loss American team is still probably top 10, top 15. So yeah. They'd have to fall off a lot in the win-loss department for me to be, to drop out of, maybe out of the top 15, but certainly there are people that are going to be like, they shouldn't even be top 25. And I think that would be a ridiculous argument to make.
As you're talking about their schedule,
right?
I'm like, I'm like not entirely unconvinced that they won't pull off like a Houston type run through the American. Like, I'm not that scared by Memphis this year,
They might.
Wichita State, I guess Wichita State upgraded with Paul Mills, who I think will put together a good squad. But like Tulane, they don't have Jalen Cook anymore. I know Ron Hunter's a good coach too, but I think they're going to have a talent advantage over every team in that league.
Oh, for sure. It's less about that and more about the number of landmines in there
that makes sense.
Are increased, right? It's
for sure.
They can't struggle through games in the same way. Now, they didn't necessarily struggle through a lot of those games in Conference USA, but there were some that should probably closer than they should have been. And I think if that's, against Wichita State or Memphis or something like that, you're talking about maybe a different result. Especially towards the end of the year, there were some games where you were kind of sweating out whether FAU was going to win that game or not, in a game that they should have probably won by 5 to 10 points minimum. So.
Well, let's move to the team that beat FAU in that Final Four matchup in San Diego State. Another team we seem to be pretty split on, but I think have high expectations for. I have San Diego State 12th. Connor has them 14th coming into the season. Riley has them at 21, outside his top 20. But Riley, I know you're still pretty high on the Aztecs.
Yeah, I probably just need to move him up a couple spots. I'll be honest with that. Honestly, because of my my East Coast bias, I was like, "Oh, look at me throwing the West Coast a bone by putting San Diego State 21st." But yeah, I think I need to move him up some, just because bringing Lamont Butler back's obviously huge. Trammell is back, but I want to take a second just to gas up Jay Powell as someone who covered the Big South for the Almanac last year and watched Jay Powell just dominate in the Big South tournament. To me, he had a 7% block rate last season. He can handle the ball a little bit at 6'9", 100. He's only 190 pounds, so like maybe Dutcher will bulk him up a little bit. But he just feels like that kind of player who gets into Dutcher's system and becomes a defensive monster. I think he'll be a very suitable Kashad Johnson replacement. It would not surprise me at all to just if he's just feasting, getting weak side blocks and creating havoc with his length. So I think he's, not going to put up crazy numbers because no one really does in that San Diego State offense. But to me, it just seems like a perfect fit for what they want to do defensively.
Yeah, it's a culture pick for me. You bring back a good majority of the guys who were key pieces on that national championship game team. I do have questions about replacing Nathan Mensah inside. Although he did get bullied by Sonogo in that championship game. I think they're going to be better offensively than they were last year. And I think that was an emphasis for them. And again, there are a lot of teams around the country that have big-time questions to me that are ranked even inside the top 15, top 20. San Diego State, even though they might not be as good as last year's team without Matt Bradley too, doesn't have as many of those. I have more, I think, sure things there than a lot of other teams do, Connor. I think there's a real chance they're the best team on the entire West Coast again.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly certainly close, right? It's them, Gonzaga, and
USC.
I don't know if I would put USC or Arizona into that conversation yet, but I am.
It's kind of funny that we're having a conversation about best teams on the West Coast, and it is either Gonzaga or San Diego State, and no Pac-12 love.
Yeah. I think Arizona will make a push for that. Arizona's got a good roster.
With Caleb Love?
Yeah. No. Yeah, imagine the fans' joy when they realized they were replacing Kirk Kriisa with Caleb Love.
It's the same.
I saw a post.
Same, but different. But still the same.
On Reddit. Someone said something about Reddit. It was a Carolina fan on like the college basketball subreddit about how like when Caleb Love is on your team, your best memories become the 3 games where he turned into God, and you spend the rest of your time wondering why he did. Just thinking of it's like thinking about, oh yeah, that time Caleb Love turned to God, and why could he not do that more frequently? It's worded a little more eloquently than that, but it got a good chuckle out of me because I'm like,
you see what Baycott said about him?
Yeah, that it was like they're divorced, but they have kids, still love each other.
Yeah, it was great. It's the Caleb Love experience as a whole. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Connor. San Diego State being potentially best on the West Coast together, at least in that mix with Gonzaga. Do you think they can be that?
I mean, it's not a stretch. It's not a stretch to say that they'll have the best 1 through 3 on the West Coast in terms of depth and potentially starting 5. Although USC starting 5 in that backcourt is going to be really dang good. But they have Trammell coming back, Butler coming back, Parrish coming back. They add Jay Powell. They add Reese Dixon-Waters, who again has improved his defense over his 3 years at USC. Didn't shoot the ball well last year, but he was a 45% 3-point shooter the year before. So if he can split the difference between 30 and 45, that's a 36% 3-point shooter. I mean, that's solid given what San Diego State has had. So that backcourt is really good. I think where you're really going to see it is, like you said, is there a good chance that they replace Nathan Mensah? I think, is Jaden Ledee back?
He's back. And I think we see a situation where maybe he plays center.
Yeah. And he had moments. I know they were really excited heading into last year for him, and he became kind of a role player. But they need someone to shore up the middle to play that style of defense that they love to play. And I just need to see that happen before I'm saying they're the best team on the West Coast. I think their floor of all the teams is certainly the highest. I think they have a higher floor than Gonzaga. I think they have a higher floor than USC and then Arizona. I just that center spot for me, until I see Ledee actually deliver on the hype that he had coming to San Diego State, that's what their limiting factor is for me. Right now, I have them second on the West Coast behind Gonzaga. I think 1 spot or 2 spots behind Gonzaga. So 1 spot behind Gonzaga. So it's really close. But
I want
a top 15 team.
Yeah, I think so. I want to hit on a couple more teams in a little bit of rapid fire succession in terms of how we view them, because there are wide splits on these. West Virginia is the first of them because they are the transfer portal. They are the transfer portal warriors. There we go. Connor, I know you hate them. Riley, I know you love them.
Yeah.
Connor, why do you hate them?
I love them, man.
I don't think the team's going to be a defensive monster that they need to be, given the fact that they can't shoot. And what we saw in the tournament was the team that could shoot the ball won. And your best 3-point shooter is Kirk Kriisa. I'm going to end my case there.
Okay. Riley, why do you like them?
Because I think Bob Huggins, for one, showed last year that he could take 2 guys who had, let's say, accusations of being head cases, and Eric Stevenson and Trey Mitchell, and he turned them into a tournament team. Like, he took a risk and he got the best year out of Eric Stevenson. He got a really good season out of Trey Mitchell, Trey Mitchell made 37 or 36% of his threes last year and played per KenPom 62% of his minutes at the 4. So I think that pairing with Jesse Edwards can work. Edwards is really talented. He is a really good big man who I'm think he should still be able to block a lot of shots even outside of that zone scheme, and he's got some stuff to him down in the post. I also love Raekwon Battle. I think Raekwon Battle is ready for the Big 12. I mean, he put up 27 points against Kansas State in the first round of the tournament last year. He played on the best defensive team in the Big Sky at Montana State. And sorry, I forgot which. I didn't want to mess up and say Big West and have the West Coasters coming at me saying I don't know ball. But Montana State was the best defensive team in the Big Sky last year. Like, Battle's coming from a good scheme, and yeah, I'm excited to see how this roster works. You got Kirk Kriisa setting dudes up. Like, it could be like a reality show, but I'm going to be tuned in the whole time. I can't wait to watch this team.
I don't have them.
I would like to point out that Raekwon Battle was probably one of the lesser defenders on that Montana State team. And I think he'll benefit from the same thing offensively he did at Montana State, which is just he's not going to be the offensive focal point, or at least from a defensive perspective for the opponent, he's not going to be the guy you are worried about. And I think that's what he had a little bit of last year is that he went into that season. Jabril Bello was the guy you game plan around, and it opened up the floor. And I think the same thing's going to happen with Montana or with West Virginia, where you're gonna scheme around that 4-5 spot, and it'll open up the floor a little bit for Battle. I mean, I don't know if that's going to benefit Kriisa, because he also was on a team where you scheme around the 4-5, and he was not the better for it. So we'll see how West Virginia does.
Are we sure Kriisa is that much of, like, are we overreacting with how much we're worried about Kirk Kriisa?
Yes.
Like, the dude is a pure passer. He takes some bad shots. Like, I think Kirk Kriisa can. I mean, he just was the starting point guard for a 1 seed and a 2 seed. And I know his coach wasn't exactly sad to see him go, but he's still like.
I think it's worth pointing out too, he was not the reason why they were 1 seed or 2 seed, but he was part of the reason why they did not advance to the Sweet 16 either time. Or sorry, past the Sweet 16.
I think Kurt. Yeah,
I'll be remiss if we don't touch on Kentucky. I'll be remiss if we don't touch on Kentucky. We all have them pretty low. Riley, you don't have them ranked. I will ask, what would you like to see from Kentucky, Riley, over these next few months for you to feel comfortable ranking them?
Add some players who aren't 3-star recruits, like close the deal on Arthur Kaluma or Grant. Like, I guess they're not getting Grant Nelson, but yeah, you got to close the deal on Arthur Kaluma for me to feel somewhat, good about it. I like Antonio Reeves is going to transfer. They're looking at, those 2 guards who are both ball dominant, and Rob Dillingham and DJ Wagner. They're both looking to get their shots up, and I know Aaron Bradshaw wants to play the 4, which could detract from Kaluma coming in too. And it just seems like at this point in the game, you're going to be pretty hard pressed to find good players coming off the bench too. Like there's just not really that many veterans in the portal right now. I know Connor mentioned guys are expected to portal between now and August. Like they could really use a veteran guard or wing who was comfortable coming off the bench, or even a front court player. But I mean, you can probably find like a transfer out there who's maybe from the area, who's playing at a Horizon League school or something, and has dreamed of playing at Kentucky. But that might be the best you're going to get at this point. Like I can't envision a world where I'm ranking them come November.
I still have them ranked because of how talented that freshman class is. I know they are not great, but I have a hard time totally writing off talent, and I don't know. That might be dumb on my part, but that's just my thinking. Before we wrap up here, I want to make sure that we touch on teams that we might be higher on or lower on that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about. So, Connor, give me a team that you feel really good about and are higher on than maybe the general consensus is right
now. This has only happened in the last few days. I might sneak Florida into my top 25.
Okay.
They were kind of quiet most of the portal season, but they bring in one of the best playmakers in the country last year in Zion Pullen. They bring in Julian Rishwain, who was hurt last year, but the previous year for San Francisco, he was fantastic on that tournament team. Going back to play for his former coach, I really like the fit there. Tyree Samuel, EJ Jarvis, Walter Clayton, Micah Handlogeton, I can never pronounce that one, are all players that were, not stars, right? But they were solid starters or sixth men on their respective teams in conferences that weren't terrible, or at least for teams that weren't terrible. So I like what Florida's put together. I actually think I might like it more than I did last year, even though some of the talent that they brought in last year was a lot more promising. I just feel like this year the pieces might fit a little bit better. I'm going to give Todd Golden one more shot to impress me with his style of coaching at an SEC school before I'm willing to throw in the towel. But I think that the talent's certainly there, and maybe even more so than building a team around Lofton. Like building a team around Zion Pullen, I feel like it's not difficult to do because he just wants the team to score. He'll score himself if he needs to, really good finishing around the rim, but also a really good passer, has really good court vision, commands a lot of defensive focus, so he's able to find those players around him that can make shots.
Riley, what about for you? Who is a team you're higher on than most that we haven't talked about yet?
So I'm going to go with Clemson, which even feels a little insane for me to say that, but I'm really buying into the Tigers this year because of how they played when PJ Hall was healthy. As long as they're not playing Q3 teams like Loyola Chicago, South Carolina, and Louisville, they're a really good team. But in conference play last year, they had the
PJ
second
Hall
best
play in that
defense in
loss
the
to Louisville?
ACC. Yeah, but he wasn't okay. Yeah, he wasn't healthy in the South Carolina game, but it's one game. Let's let it slide. But I think they had the best 2-point percentage defense in ACC play, which I think that's a metric that can that translates from year to year. That one's not really based on luck, and I think Brownell has had some good defensive teams before, and kind of like I said about LJ Cryer, they, to a lesser extent, Clemson is not Houston. Don't hear me say that, but they can cover up some of those deficiencies of Joe Girard. And I think even beyond PJ Hall, they have some nice depth with Ian Shefflin, who impressed me a little bit last year off the bench, can pass the ball a little bit for a big. I think Jack Clark is a better shooter than what his percentage at NC State showed. And he might be tasked to be like a Hunter Tyson replacement, which I wouldn't expect those type of numbers. But I think Clemson has a chance to capitalize on what could again be a weaker ACC. So I have them ranked 21 right now, which, yeah, that might feel a little bit high, but I'm buying into a healthy PJ Hall.
I think that's fair. South Carolina bias aside, I do think that Clemson should make the tournament this year. If they do not, that's a problem. The team I'm higher on than I think everybody I've seen is TCU. And I've talked about it a little bit on here. I love what Jamie Dixon did in the portal. You bring in Avery Anderson, guy with Big 12 experience, didn't get to showcase a lot of his real offensive repertoire in that Oklahoma State, we'll use system in quotation marks, because that team just really struggled to score offensively. But you put him and his athleticism in this up-tempo offense, I think that's going to make the most of it. Bringing Jameer Nelson as well from Delaware, that's a huge plus. You bring in Ernest Uday from Kansas Town, though. You bring in Sam Mustafa from Coastal Carolina. That gives you a solid front court. Travion Tennyson transferring in from Corpus Christi is an elite shooter. They've done a great job upgrading their weaknesses from last year. That they added more shooting. They're keeping the backcourt, I think. You're not going to have a Mike Miles, but I think you're keeping your backcourt still very productive. I don't see a drop-off, really, for TCU this season in a way that you would have expected with them losing somebody like Mike Miles. To me, they're a top 20 team. They're going to be able to withstand Big 12 play as long as they don't get hurt. I think that's a team that people are going to be kind of surprised by this year. On the flip side, team that I am lower than the consensus, and I want to get your guys' take on a team you're lower than as well before we get out of here. I don't think I love Texas A&M, really. I have them ranked just because I know they return a lot. But anytime you can't really shoot and really struggle offensively and don't have a real game plan on how to do better at that, that's an issue for me. Like, to me, I think their best case scenario is repeating last season. And last season was fine, certainly better than A&M had been. But I don't know if I buy the top 15 hype that's surrounding this team. There are still too many holes, too many weaknesses that I don't know how they got better at. So, to me, that's why I'm lower on them. Riley, who is somebody that you are lower on than the consensus?
Can I say UNC? Can I say my own team?
You are allowed to, yes.
I have UNC probably in the 25 to 30 range, maybe 35-ish. And I think I want to see it after last year. Last year was, an abject disaster compared to expectations. Defensively, the numbers are pretty good, but there was a lot of breakdowns in key moments. Ball movement was really poor. Now, some of that I expect to be fixed. I think Elliot Cadeau can amend a world of issues of ball movement. Just with, I've said this on podcasts, I said this on a radio hit yesterday. I think he's going to be the best. Well, excuse me, he has the ceiling to be the best passer we've seen at the college level since Lonzo. So I'm really excited about that. And I think both Cormac Ryan and Harrison Ingram will be good role players. But I'm really concerned about the depth, even more so after Simeon Wilcher decommitted. and there's really only one wing that's like that's Harrison Ingram, like one true wing, and I think he's better as a 4 than a 3. There's not really anybody on this roster who's taller than 6'5" and can make shots aside from Harrison Ingram. So that's a glaring hole. The contrarian take would be like, I have a ton of faith in Armando Bacot and RJ Davis. I think if RJ stays healthy, he's going to give you 16, 17 points a game, and Bacot will give you about the same if he's healthy. But I just need to see a more cohesive product on the floor this upcoming year, and a little more bench usage before I'm ready to say, like, yes, let's put them into the top 20, top 15.
This is make or
And
break
we lost
to
Connor.
me. Hubert Davis is not going to get fired after this season, right? So it's not make or break in that sense. But we're going to know a lot about how I think Hubert Davis's tenure is going to go based on this season. I have them ranked 21st because I do like the way the roster fits together. I think it fits together much better than last year's did. But everything you said, Riley, was right. Like, they're a team to me that I have ranked because it's on paper and it's preseason. I see them play. They're a candidate to drop out very quickly, depending on how things go. So I certainly like that as well. Connor, who is somebody that you are lower on than the consensus?
There's two teams that come to mind, I think. The first one being Tennessee. And both these teams I have in my top 25. I just think my expectations for them are lower.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Tennessee got significantly better offensively, and I think that was their big issue last year. I think they'll be about what they were last year, but I've been seeing them pop up in top 5s, top 10s. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that, they're surefire to be, finish in the top 5, top 10. The other one, and I tweeted about this, we need to pump the brakes on USC. They're good, or they have the potential to be good. We know what Boogie Ellis is. He's going to be their go-to scorer. I mean, if he's not, then what's he on the team for, in my opinion, right? He's going to handle the ball. He's going to make the plays. You do add some good pieces. I think we're pushing it a little bit too high up because of the James Rodman factor. Like, DJ Rodman was solid. He wasn't next level last year. And Bronny James is a good defender. I think we're putting we're putting too many expectations on his shoulders purely because of who his dad is. He's a solid recruit, definitely. He's going to bring a good floor to this team, but I think we're putting top 5, top 10 recruit expectations on him when he's just not that, right? He's just not a top 5 recruit in this class, and we've seen USC be solid under Andy Enfield with better talent, and they still weren't at the level that I think people are expecting them to be this year, right? The best team they had was, I forget what they finished in KenPom, but like their raw efficiencies, I think, were like 6th in the country, but they had the best defensive front court, in my opinion, in the country that year. So we'll see what USC does. I wouldn't put them as my favorite to win the Pac-12. I think Arizona's probably still that. And if they don't win the Pac-12, people are going to point to that as a failure, not because it is a failure, but because of their unrealistic expectations for what Bronny James and DJ Rodman are.
I think that's fair. I have USC 13th. And my reason for that is something you mentioned about the best teams and the Mobleys, in particular, the elite front courts that they had. This is the best backcourt Andy Enfield has had since he's been at USC. To me, this team is built to play like that Dunk City team and play that kind of system in a way that they've played it, but I think elevate it to another level because of the backcourt that they have. This is something that I, admittedly, am projecting in my own head. I have not seen it. I have not, there's nothing really on paper that can really tell you that this is a top 15 team. But to me, you put these 3 guys, Isaiah Collier, Bronny James, and Boogie Ellis together running as fast as that Dunk City team did and making decisions. To me, that's a scary team. Now, I assume Andy Enfield's going to want to play that way. We'll see if he does, and if he does not, it's going to turn into a Florida Mike White situation where I knock them down very quickly. But that's why I have them high, because I think everything you said, Connor, is right and correct.
He needs to adjust to not having length at every position besides point guard, because he's not. You have to play at least two of those three together, and they're not the 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" shooting guards that USC has had the last 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So
we'll see. It'll certainly be interesting. That'll do it for this episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. If there is something, a team, or a topic you would like to hear us talk about, make sure you find us on Twitter at the Hangout CBB. Message us there. Let us know. We'll talk about it on a future podcast episode. One, you're helping us get content, so thank you for that. But two, we want to make sure we're talking about the things you want to hear and are interested in learning more about. So you have a question, let us know. We'll talk about it on a future podcast episode. But thank you guys very much for listening or watching if you're on YouTube. My co-host Connor Hope, Riley Davis, I'm Brian Ralph. Talk to you again next time.
Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, college. Whoa. Basketball, college.